Greetings to the coffee community. Welcome to yet another podcast from the Uganda Coffee Platform. My name is Moses Mugume from Cafe Africa Uganda, a secretariat to the Uganda Coffee Platform. I'll be your moderator in this podcast, and I'm joined by my colleagues Scovia Namsovia and Andrew Magombe. Scovia is the M&E and Learning Manager at Cafe Africa Uganda, and Andrew is the Senior Coffee Agronomist at Cafe Africa Uganda. How are you, colleagues?
Pretty good, thank you, Moses.
I am very fine, thank you.
Yes, before we embark on our topic today, allow me acknowledge our sponsors, Global Coffee Platform and IDH, for supporting this cause. In today's podcast, we shall focus on what living income is, and then we shall see why living income is important. Then that will take us to what can be done if the households are not attaining a living income. I'll go straight to Andrew. With your field experience working with farmers, how would you define living income?
From the perspective of the farming household, living income is when a household generates enough money to have a decent standard of living for all household members, plus some extra money set aside for savings and emergencies. But that is once farm costs are covered. So that's living income.
Okay. When you talk about farm costs, how do farming households spend their money?
Besides setting aside some money for savings and emergencies, households spend their money to cover 7 major elements or essential needs, which include food, housing, water, clothing, healthcare, education, and transport. So these are the expenditure elements upon which families normally spend.
When you talk about decent, what is a decent standard of living?
Decent, in this case, in the context of living income, refers to quality of essential needs. In other words, essential needs that have the ability to meet international or national standards or set guidelines and local preferences. For instance, if we talk of food, in the context of living income, it's not just food, but nutritious food. Yes. In summary, it's a balanced diet. Food that has all the required food elements, essential elements, for example, proteins, carbohydrates, minerals, vitamins, roughage. So that's what we call nutritious food. If it is housing, in the context of living income, it's not just housing, but decent housing. And decent housing is the type of housing that has adequate living space, adequate aeration, light, and protection or security, among others. If it is water, it's not just water, but clean and safe water. So in the context of living income, the word decent refers to quality of basic needs. That's the key aspect to emphasize.
Andrew, maybe can you elaborate more in terms of the local preferences? An example.
Okay, the word local preferences should be applying on each of the essential needs. But let's take food, for instance. In the case of food, let me use an example of pork. Pork might be nationally recognized as a source of proteins. Okay? But from the local perspective, taking into consideration an Islamic dominated population, pork may not fit the local preference. So in that case, much as it suits the national standards or guidelines for providing proteins, in the context of this Islamic population, it may not qualify to be nutritious food. So that is what we are looking at.
Yes, from your definition and explanation of living income, how different is that from poverty line and prosperous income, Scovia?
Moses, that is an interesting but also an important question to ask and for our audience to understand. When we talk about poverty line, all these ones are incomes. and they are very important. But for the case of poverty line, it's about attaining a basic survival. Let's use an example of food like Andrew mentioned. In poverty line, if it's food, it's about managing hunger. So, for example, are households able to attain food to manage hunger? But in living income, like Andrew emphasized, the key element is the quality. It's not just about you managing hunger, but ensuring that you are getting food with the essential elements or nutrients. In prosperous income, the main difference is that here, a household or an individual has gone beyond the essential needs. In other words, it's about getting what you want beyond what you need. And what does that mean? It means that it's looking at aspects like leisure, luxuries. Beyond, an individual already has a good quality life, decent life. They have extra money, savings for investment. They have set aside money to cater for unexpected events. But now they have the ability to have money, for example, to go for vacation, to go for holiday, to construct or live in a luxurious house, or get a luxury car. So that is prosperous income. But you can say that it's a journey. After attaining poverty line, there is still room for the case of our farmers to work hard and attain a living income. And after attaining a living income, which is decent life, there is still room for a farmer to work harder, even harder, and achieve a prosperous income.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it is very important to know why living income is important. How is living income important?
Living income is very important both globally and nationally. For the last 50 years, there has been a global movement towards eradicating poverty. From the MDGs, there was a global move of ensuring that poverty is eradicated. But of late, globally, it has been realized that it is not just about eradicating poverty. There is now an increasing pressure to ensure that people are earning enough money to live decently. And so this pressure is even transitioning into global and national policies. For example, we have the recent CS3D, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, that looks at ensuring that people are paid well for the work that they do. Specifically for the coffee sector, it is important because the living income as a concept helps us to explore whether the price that is paid to the coffee farmers, to the workers, to the traders, and all the people in the value chain, whether that price is adequate enough to make them live a decent life. And the most important bit is that when a farming household, for example, earns a decent income, they are not just providing for the family, but they are also able, remember we talked about a saving, so they are also able to invest back in their farms. And there we can say invest in sustainable farming practices, but also able to invest in the community, which can promote community development.
We hear the word decent life. How do we know that our farmers have attained a decent life?
A decent life, first of all, for one to attain a decent life, it goes hand in hand with a living income. So how do we then know that a decent life has been attained by a household? A few indicators to look at. One, the ability of that household to provide essential needs and quality essential needs I'm emphasizing the word equality, plus some emergencies. If that family can afford that, then it's an indicator that they are having a decent life. 2, the ability of that household to invest, to make on-farm investments. For example, investing in improved technologies on-farm. That is an indicator. The third one is the ability of that household to invest off-farm, to have off-farm investments like retail shops and other investments that are off-farm. Those are just some of the indicators that show that the household is or has attained a living income and therefore is having a decent life. However, this is relative as it varies from place to place. I would like to ask Scovia to throw some additional light on what I've just mentioned.
You're right. Understanding whether farmers or householders attained a decent life varies, like you have mentioned. But the good news is that we have what we call a living income benchmark that can be used to determine whether people are attaining a decent life.
Okay. The word benchmark has now come in. What is a living income benchmark?
When we are talking about living income benchmark, simply put it as the amount of money that is needed by an average, and marking the word average here is very key, an average household in a particular area to attain a decent living. It varies from place to place, like Andrew has mentioned. And how can we have this benchmark, living income benchmark? It is determined through conducting scientific studies. That means it's informed by data. And because it's a study, it also varies from time to time. What does that mean? It means that the living income benchmark for a particular place A, maybe for Luwero, for example, area or Luwero district in 2024 might not be the same in 2026 or 5 years later. For example, in 2022, Fairtrade International conducted a living income study among coffee farmers, and it was determined that the living income benchmark on average nationally is 18 million.
In Uganda?
In Uganda, 18 million. For the different, it was conducted for the different regions in Uganda, but on average, it is 18 million. Okay. And that means that it would require 18 million for an average household to afford essential needs, to save for investments, and also set aside money for unexpected events.
Is that per year?
Annually, yes. Annually, yes.
Okay,
You're right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And the word decent life keeps coming in. How does a coffee farmer get his money to live a decent life?
There are 3 major sources of income for farming households, and these constitute what we call net household income. The word net is critical, is key here, because it is income after you've offset or removed, taken care of the costs. So look at the net. And again, 3 major sources or ways through which households generate their income. The word is generate. The first one is net on-farm income. This is income from sale of farm products plus the value of products consumed by the household. Why do we add the value of the products consumed? If this household didn't have this food, it would have to find money to buy it. So that's why we put it under the category of net on-farm income. The second category is net off-farm income. This is income from investments that are made off-farm. For example, earnings from retail shops, border bikes, salon, and any other businesses that are off-farm, that through which a farming household is earning some income or generating. The third category is other incomes. Now this takes the form of remittances to the farm, to the farming household, For example, gifts, donations, money sent from the farming households to the farming households from household members employed in urban centers or abroad. So that is other incomes. So when you add these three types of incomes, it constitutes what we call the net farm household income. To make it more clear, let's take an example. Let's take a household of John and Mary, and there are 4 school-going kids. John and Mary produce food crops, coffee, and matoke. Now, this constitutes what we call on-farm income. John and Mary may have a roadside store and also run a border business. So this constitutes off-farm income. Income that is generated from that angle is off-farm income. Now, while their adult child Stella, living in Kampala, is sending every month about 150,000 shillings home. Now, this remittance that Stella is giving the household constitutes what we call other incomes. So when you add the other incomes, off-farm income and on-farm income, you get what we call the net household income for John and Mary's household. So that's what it is.
Okay. Yes. So what happens when a household is not earning enough to have a decent life?
If the net household income is not enough to enable the household afford a decent standard of living, then there is a gap. And this gap is what we call living income gap.
And Andrew, what does that mean? Does it mean someone will die, someone won't survive, or what happens?
Now, having a gap doesn't mean the household will die. No. The household won't die, they can still live, but then the household will be living, they are below the decent standard of living. Now, what this means is that the household will either squeeze or compromise on most or all of the essential needs. For example, the household may compromise on the quality of food or even skip on some meals, okay? They may also compromise on the quality of housing.
And Andrew, to bring it to the into context, if you look at John and Mary's household, who have 4 school-going children, if there is a living income gap, you'll find that some of their kids will be denied the opportunity to go to school because they have to pay school fees. Maybe they are not able to pay school fees for all of them.
This is common in some rural households. You'll find where there's living income gap, some households have a tendency to deny the girl child an opportunity for education in favor of the boy or the male child, just because there isn't enough income to support all of them or both of them. Another implication is that having a living income gap can also lead to unsustainable borrowing at household level in an attempt to close the living income gap. Besides, the earning capacity of such households may further be slowly eroded. For example, inability to implement good agricultural practices, the sale of immature coffee berries, or even flowers, okay, at below the market price, instead of waiting for the coffee to ripen fully and sell it at a better price. So these are some of the negative implications of having a living income gap at household level. In Scovia's example, Scovia cited a living income benchmark of 18 million. Let's take that as an example. Now, if a certain household has a net household income of, say, 15 million, then that difference between the benchmark and the net household income is what we would call the living income gap. And more importantly, this is where we should put a lot of focus. The household and all other development partners need to work collaboratively towards closing that income gap. So that's where development interventions of projects and other interventions, initiatives need to pay particular attention.
Talking about closing the gap, what can be done to close the living income gap in the context you're bringing it out?
Closing that living income gap requires improvement of the different factors that influence the income. And at farm household level, there are about four key factors. One is the yield or volume of production. The second one is the price, actually. The third is the cost of production. And the fourth is the diversified income. Maybe to throw some light on each of those. Yield. How can we improve yield as an influence of income? Yield can be improved by putting in a practice of practices that increase yield sustainably. For example, regenerative agriculture practices. These practices increase yield sustainably, okay, and therefore contribute to influencing or increasing the income. Price. This can be improved by one, value addition. That is a key aspect. Quality, improving quality of produce. Then three, contract marketing or contract production or contract farming. Those are some of the ways by which price can be improved. The cost of production. This can be improved by employing technologies that reduce the cost of production. And the diversified income, yes. At farm level first, farmers can be advised to engage into multiple enterprises. You don't rely on one. You can have a daily income generating enterprise, a seasonal generating enterprise, and an annual income generating enterprise. Okay. But broadly, looking at the whole picture of the farm, the big broader picture of the farm, we can have the three income streams discussed before. One is on-farm income, off-farm income, and other incomes. So a household should embrace all those forms of income. Now, there's a mistake that farmers pick out one factor and look at it in isolation. That does not work. It is advisable to look at these factors in a combination. For instance, yield alone, increase in yield alone, while the price may be stable, but the cost of production may be high. That alone, if those three factors are not looked at in combination, will mislead the farmer to think that he has increased his income, yet the high cost of production may have reduced the production much as the yield is high.
Andrew, thank you, because you've emphasized the farmer needs to focus on this, the farmer needs to do this. And I think it's important for us to emphasize to our audience that in these factors, each one of us plays a part. There is a tendency sometimes of thinking that promoting or reducing the living income gap, maybe it's a responsibility of the government. But from your explanation, if you can elaborate more to our audience that this is not a responsibility of government, but even the farmers themselves have a part to play in reducing the living income gap.
Scovia, a very interesting point. In conclusion, the effort to reduce the living income gap starts with the household. The farming household should be the first to embrace the responsibility. However, it's a concerted effort which takes a multi-stakeholder approach, a multi-sectoral approach, and a multi-dimensional approach. It calls for increased collaborative networking and public-private partnerships. It's not a one-man journey. We need to build partnerships and networks to attain this effort of reducing the living income gap.
Andrew and Scovia, allow me to conclude with land size as an income driver. Other factors held constant, bigger land size results into bigger production, hence more income. On the other hand, smaller land size can result in low production, thus low income. Thank you, Scovia and Andrew. And to our listeners, we have come to the end of this podcast. And once again, thanks to IDH and GCP.